So
Sort of.
I'm trying to figure out where to start the story because there's two parts to this story.
The coffee part and the losing weight part.
Thank you.
She's feeling very literal today.
Two Sundays ago, I wake up with, I'm already feeling not great. I had a cold. And then I forgot a cup of coffee. I just didn't drink it. And midday, I had the worst headache ever. And
It's called withdrawals.
I legit thought I had COVID all over again. And I thought I was a goner. So I went to bed. I woke up the next day and I'm like, I'm not drinking coffee. Like I just detoxed.
Not going back there.
I can't go back. So it's been a week and a half that I haven't had coffee.
Whoa.
Well, simultaneously and separately from that, I've dropped like 6 pounds. Okay. And
you put a lot of stuff in your coffee?
How much creamer do you think I must be putting in if I've lost 6 pounds? But here's the deal. I woke up and I was like, Stephanie, I think something's wrong. I think I might have like a really, because they say unexplained weight loss.
Oh God! You immediately went to a tumor.
I was like, I'm dying. I'm dying. I'm losing weight. I'm dying.
So I had to stop myself from saying when you said about 2 weeks ago, I almost said, wait, start after that.
You should have.
How long is this story going to be if we're starting 2 weeks ago?
Touche.
Okay, sorry. If you just
we are in a series about the story of Joseph, the highs and lows and story of Joseph. And, we understand people find us at different times. If you enter into listening with this episode, you might be a little lost. So let me encourage you to go back a couple episodes ago. We started in chapter 37, and I can't off the top of my head right now figure out where that is, but you can see where we started in chapter 37. Go back and listen to that because we're building kind of the story here as we go along, and we are in chapter 45. And like we normally do, if you're not used to kind of listening in to us, we go through the text and then we kind of just give some color commentary along the way. So how y'all doing? You guys good?
Doing good.
Yeah, you guys ready for this?
I think so.
Okay, we'll find out. All right, so what we're entering into with chapter 45, if you tuned in last week, we covered 42, 43, 44, and part of 45, but we want to do a little bit of a recap. We had these brothers who were experiencing this famine come to Joseph and didn't know it was Joseph. They went to Egypt because they were looking for food, and there was this whole, I don't know how you would summarize. It wasn't cat and mouse, but there was like this game being played between Joseph.
Yeah, he's kind of testing them, I think, to see how they're going to respond, what they're going to do, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Remember that one time they threw him in a pit?
Yeah.
So, fool me once.
The last time I saw you guys, didn't go so well.
Exactly.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, I didn't even think about that. That was the last, we didn't really talk about that specifically, but that was the last time we saw these guys.
I'm not real eager to just jump back in.
Which brings the whole big meaning to why he did what he did.
Well,
right.
We are not the same. I would not respond that way.
Yeah.
Last time I saw you in no.
Right.
Come on, wow.
Yeah. And so there was these series of tests. And so finally, there was this moment, crescendo moment, which leads us into 45, where Judah, and again, one of our episodes, we covered Judah. 38 is an entire chapter about Judah and really how jacked up he is.
I was about to say, what a scoundrel he is.
Yeah, a scoundrel.
I know she even had a tone.
What year are we?
Scoundrel.
I don't know. I think there's a saloon and I don't know. It's a very old Western.
And so then, so then we see this transformation before our eyes, and basically Judah offers himself up to this governor, who again they don't know is their brother, in place of their younger brother Benjamin, because Judah knew how much Benjamin meant to Jacob. And so here we have this moment that was kind of brings us into chapter 45, when we see that Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood before him. He began to cry, and then there's this big reveal where he finally says, after all the tests and all the back and forths with his brothers, that he is who he says he is.
And you know what I was thinking when I was reading this? And again, we did read this last week, but just sort of looking at it again with different eyes, it occurred to me when I read that verse that he couldn't control himself and he just cried and had everybody go out from him. I think I forgot, in the midst of all the God was with Joseph and God was with Joseph and God was with Joseph. Can you imagine how lonely this was?
Yeah.
He was a foreigner. The culture was totally different. I mean, yes, God was with him, but he had no family left. He had no idea what was going on at home. I mean, to me, this was just a reminder of, yes, God was with him, and it was still lonely. And it still hurt. I mean, he was still a human.
I appreciate you bringing that up because I feel like there's times in my spiritual walk where I have wrestled with, I'm supposed to be like Jesus, and I have the Holy Spirit, and therefore, I have no humanness left.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm supposed to be a good Christian, always puts Jesus on, always has the Holy Spirit, and then
love, joy, peace, gentleness, patience, kindness.
But we are human, and this is a human moment.
Yeah.
For Joseph.
So I mean, he responds, I think, in a way that shows that God is
Spiritual
with him,
fruit.
and yes, he responds that way. But he still felt the weight of the last 20 years and what he had been through by himself in a foreign land.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's a great snapshot of permission, permission to be able to feel human and yet still respond in a way. And mind you, there was a lot of readiness for him to respond in this way because he had a habit of wisdom, receiving blessing from the Lord, receiving favor from the Lord, and that kind of thing.
That's good.
And so then he does this thing. We kind of said this last week, but it was just really funny because he announces who he is, and then it says they're dismayed at his presence. So he had to repeat it again.
Yeah.
Who he was. They were just in complete shock, and then he kind of reveals, here. He divulges God's plan of preservation. I chose the word preservation because Joseph says it twice here, that God is the one that did it. So he saw this guilt. We covered that last week too. There was all this guilt in the brothers' minds and hearts, and they were wrestling with what they did, and then this big crescendo, humble moment with Judah. And so he kind of then says, "Hey, settle down.
Yeah,
don't take all on this guilt. The Lord has been in control this whole entire time."
Yeah, but he also reminds them, verse 4, whom you sold. I am Joseph, whom you sold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, he goes on to give God credit for sending him. He says as much, that God sent me before you.
Yeah.
But let's not forget the circumstances God used.
Right.
Yeah.
You sold me.
I love that.
So both things are true, and
he
so
calls
I think
it out.
Yeah, and I think that's good for us to see that it's okay to trust God and also acknowledge what has happened to you.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, it is good. And I think there's so much there with when we're walking through life and we're experiencing things that are done to us. We want to make it black and white. We want to categorize it. And that's where we get into people blaming God. And we get into, just this wandering, this wilderness.
Or well-meaning people sometimes will encourage you just the whole
that's right.
kind of let go, let God thing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not always best.
Yeah.
Right.
Because just to stuff something and pretend it didn't happen or that it didn't affect you or that it wasn't hurtful, things like that. It's okay it's just okay to acknowledge that both those things are true. I know God loves me and I know God allowed this to happen.
Right.
This may never make sense to me over here. Like in this life, we may never know that God sent us ahead to Egypt to save something else. You know what I mean? So there is still that trust element, but faith is an absence of acknowledgement.
And what's the theological buckets there? The sovereignty of God and just the sinfulness of man?
Probably.
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't.
Providence, all those
Yeah,
things.
I don't know about the theological bucket, but I was just sitting here thinking, in no part here does Joseph diminish their sin.
Yeah.
He just exalts God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we feel like we have to do one or the other, but no, he does not diminish their sin. He just says God's bigger than it.
Yeah, it's good.
I think that's important.
Yeah, that is important for sure. Specifically, revealing of the plan. What I find interesting here, and then later there's going to be this blessing that comes from Joseph and then Pharaoh about this lavishness that gets poured onto them. But I think that's the summary of what happens kind of in the next several verses. Joseph says, "Go back to my father and tell him of the good news and then take all these things." And then Pharaoh comes and doubles down and says, "Yes, take all these things," and just this really lavish blessing. But it's interesting because God's promise to Abraham was the lavishness of Canaan, the promised land, not Egypt. And so there's a couple things in my mind happening, they're coming into Egypt, they're receiving this But we know what ends up happening in Exodus, where these people who are getting blessed in this way now get put into slavery, because eventually, I guess there was a Pharaoh that decided that he wasn't going to be as benevolent as the Pharaoh.
Exodus 1 or whatever, it's, there was a Pharaoh that didn't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exodus 1:8.
Exodus 1:8.
I just pulled that out of nowhere.
Wow,
Yeah,
it's
I know.
impressive. And he starts to be fearful.
So here's just a timeline question. So I know Abraham was promised land, seed, and blessing. Was he promised the land of Canaan, or just the promise of a future
Promised
land
land.
for a nation?
a land of promise.
Right, but they didn't know
I don't think so.
Egypt, Canaan, Houston.
I don't think they know geography, do they?
No, Abraham showed him
Does
the
he?
land. No, God showed Abraham the land.
Is that the same time he shows them the stars? Like
yeah.
he numbers the stars? Is that in that same place?
Your watch is talking to you. That was great.
That was weird. Don't know what happened, but for the listener,
it came through.
It's 11
I heard
a.m.
it.
right now as we're doing this.
We spend a lot of time together. I've never heard your watch do that.
I didn't know. I thought I had the volume turned off. Apparently I don't.
No, I really do think, guys, that God showed him the land.
I believe I have no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would have been.
I wasn't
Yeah.
contesting it. I was truly
Sure,
asking.
yeah.
I couldn't
And,
remember.
So there's 12 and then there's 15. Those are the two places where the Abrahamic covenant gets.
Yeah. But I guess even more than that, I guess what's interesting is, again, going back with two things being true.
Joey's right. 12:5. It talks about
It
they
does say
set out
Canaan?
for the land of Canaan.
Oh, there you go.
12:5.
Okay. Yeah.
You win.
Thank you. Usually you're like, well, you're both right.
No. Sorry, you're right on this one. It literally said in 12 verse
Yeah.
5.
Thanks for checking that.
Argue with the Bible. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that's right. No, but I think that's where I think what I was asking that question or raising that is the tension of God. Why would God do that? Why is God bringing these people into Egypt and they eventually be in slavery for 400 years? And again, I think we have this Joseph moment again in 400 years, which is, hey, God did this. He's going to use his people. He is using his people to bring glory to him and a blessing to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's a snapshot of the whole biblical narrative, right? Like,
That's right.
God brings us into fulfillment of his promises through the suffering of Jesus.
Yeah.
The New Testament version is that I don't have to suffer
Yeah.
in order to receive God's blessing.
Yeah.
Jesus did it for me.
Yeah.
So here, his people do suffer. They go into slavery, they go into the wilderness. There is all of that in order to deliver them
Yeah.
into the land of blessing.
Yeah.
The New Testament covenant and promise is, there's going to be suffering, but you don't have to do it in order to come into the promises.
And I just wish that I could know that in the midst of suffering. I mean, because I think there's it's like spiritual amnesia, because I'm going through something and I'm like, why me?
Yeah.
And then it's like, and then when you move past it, you look back and you're like, wow. You can say what Joseph said, which is, hey, God did this all, and he worked all through it,
Yep. And I think what I'm talking about is the big picture. I'm not saying that Christians don't suffer. Individually, we suffer individual thing, but we don't suffer in order to gain the big capital P promise of salvation.
Yeah, that's good. In verse 8 there, it said, so it was not you who sent me, but God. Yeah. That's the clearest it's been stated thus far. And he has, then he said, this is interesting. This is just a random little Bible study note, just in case you're wondering, you're out there reading this along with us. He has made me a father to Pharaoh. I have what? with a question mark. And then obviously then when you do a little more digging, the word is more like a chief counselor or, a commanding instructor.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Joseph was kind of communicating there. And so sends his brothers to his dad's, 11:14 a.m. There it is again.
What is happening?
I truly don't know.
We're not editing this out.
No.
This is
I
definitely
really don't
staying.
know. I'm pretty sure that Lori just said a lot of great things. I really wasn't paying attention. I was trying to find how to turn the audio off. And as soon as I put it down,
it happened again.
Talks again. So watch is going over here.
Okay. Yes. Great. Well, there we go.
Now, if it talks over here, we should leave.
We
should leave.
So there I'll provide for you. There are yet 5 years of famine to come. And so he kind of gives this detail and then he kind of moves along. Anything between this blessing coming from Joseph to his brothers that you guys had, or even the blessing from Pharaoh and some of the specifics they were sending them back to Jacob to bring them back to the land that you guys have?
I just thought it was kind of cool that Pharaoh was so happy to hear the news. Mm-hmm. I felt like he was rejoicing with him. And I don't know, that was...
It almost makes you wonder
cool.
what Pharaoh knew.
Yeah.
Like, what did
Yeah.
What did Joseph shared about him? Like, did he know the
Right.
circumstances under which Joseph came? Because this is a different
Right.
Pharaoh, right, than
I
when
think
Joseph
so. Then
showed
we
up.
started. Mm-hmm.
And so, had he heard the stories? Did he know, like, if they were close? Had he confided in him some things? And is he watching all this from this? I mean, it's just all this stuff. It's conjecture.
It doesn't really matter.
But it's a very human story, so it's okay to think very human things
Right.
about it, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think, again, like it's all conjecture, but you do wonder, like, with the excitement or with what, is going on in Pharaoh. I know him back in Bible college and seminary, it was like, was this Pharaoh a believer? Was this Pharaoh a believer?
Right.
On and on and on.
yeah.
Yeah, it's all interesting.
Odds are no, because they were
Polytheistic.
Polytheistic.
So again, they maybe recognized Yahweh, but not as the only one true God,
Yeah.
one among many.
Yeah, so if you think of theological buckets, this would be a common grace thing. The fact that
that's
God
good.
works through all of his creation
Yep.
to extend blessing, whether it's to all of creation or to his specific people.
Yeah.
It's an
That's
example
good.
of that.
This is, I don't know if I brought this up in previous episodes, but with the way in which Joseph received favor in the eyes of others.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was reading through here and I just wrote down the word blessing like a bunch of times and like lavish blessing, I think about Genesis chapter 12, but then I think about the life of Joseph and the favor he had in the eyes of Pharaoh. Like it's actually been a prayer of mine that I've kind of worked into my like regular rotation in the morning. Like I have these series of kind of repetitive prayers that I have. And I've started asking for favor in the eyes of non-believers.
That's good.
And it's just been really interesting because I think I've seen fruit of that, and because it's usually like, hey, look, I just pray for this person to get saved and this person to get saved and this person to get saved, but we all know it's a process, And so it's just been interesting as I read this and I was thinking about Pharaoh's interaction with Joseph and now with his brothers and how it extends. Like, again, we don't know if, probably not that Pharaoh was ever a believer, but clearly there was this because there was favor, God showed him favor in the eyes for Joseph.
Yeah,
It was,
to put a New Testament terminology on it, Joseph was salt and light.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. And then we have this really funny line as they finally set to go back and Pharaoh gives them this charge to go back. Joseph says, then he sent his brothers away. This is verse 24. And as they departed, he said to them, do not quarrel on the way.
We all looked at each other and laughed when we read this
did,
the other day out loud. We all went, what?
Yeah, because there's this sweet, tender moment. You had all the games happening, 42, 43, 44.
Right.
45, you have this like this, him crying and him grabbing him and kissing him. And we skipped over that today. But there's this moment where he grabs Benjamin and Chris kisses him on, hugs him and
Weeps on his neck.
whips on his neck. Yeah, it's so sweet, so sweet. And then they're back to their brother way. Do not quarrel on the way.
Well, it's almost like, too, is he protecting his little brother Benjamin because he gave him more money, more clothes. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's almost like one of those
Very
things. I know what you guys are capable of.
Yeah.
Don't do dumb things
Yeah.
on the way. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
it's just a jacked up family, man.
I have some other thoughts on this, but Lori, I'll let you go first.
I don't. I did a little bit of research on it just because it seemed so out
It
of
did.
left field,
Yeah,
and
right.
no matter how many times I read it, I was like,
Yeah.
I still don't see it.
Depends on
So the research that I read, this is totally not me, but the research that I read just talked about just how lavish the gifts were
Yeah.
from Pharaoh and how it would have been almost like coming back with 10 limousines and all this designer clothing and whatever, it's in today's language. And so he was basically saying that to them, saying like, don't quarrel over this stuff.
Yeah,
Like don't start acting, don't get jealous
fool.
of one another. Don't start acting a fool. Like you are going to come in looking like really the special people.
Yeah. Don't go back to your old ways.
Yeah.
So I had a little different take when I read this. So think about what they're going to have to go do. They're going to have to go back to dad and surprise. Remember when we told you, or whenever
Jacob got eaten by a
Joseph,
whatever, or
yeah,
Joseph.
got, well, actually, so Joseph knows that he has to send his brothers back to tell his
Okay.
dad something.
Okay.
And the surprise unveiling is going to be that Joseph's really actually alive.
Right.
So you know how like when you pull off a crime. Well, actually, no.
I was about to say no, I really don't. But go on.
Please continue.
Guys, hang on. What happened in my head was
We're not editing that part out, I promise you.
that's really funny. When you watch a crime show.
There you go. Good preface. He's wheezing.
Literally. So when you commit a crime,
You know when you really got away with something What's her word?
Jacked up.
Jacked up.
Scoundrelly.
Scoundrelly. There you go.
So you know in the show, when they're in the room and they're like, we have to get our story straight. So I imagine this idea of like them trying to get their story straight on their journey back to, and like the
that's
quarreling,
good.
the quarreling that was happening. That's what it says to me, because Joseph had to have known that that's going to be quite the conversation.
Oh, that's good. I like it.
So anyway, that was really funny.
Fun supposition.
Yeah, then it goes down, what, verse 30? I can't see. No, 26, excuse me. And they told Jacob, Joseph is still alive. And he is the ruler of all land of Egypt. It's like, let's get to the good part quick.
Quick. And he's got food for us.
Yeah.
And you know what? He's letting us move there.
Look at all these limos we got out here.
That's right.
This is
Yeah,
great.
exactly.
Yeah, they buried the lead there pretty quick.
For sure. And so then, continuing verse 26, and Jacob's heart became numb, for he did not believe them. This is such the yo-yo battle with Jacob. Like fear, okay, go ahead. Fear of sending Benjamin with the brothers. Okay, fine, let's do it. And here, clearly, his heart went numb, for he didn't believe him. That numb feeling, I don't know. I just kind of had that highlighted. I don't know what's there under numb, but
I think it's like no way.
Yeah,
like it's that denial. Like there's no way that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was assuming the worst always. I mean, that's just kind of his tack. So I'm sure he's like,
yeah, right.
Can't be.
Can't be true.
It can't be. Something that good wouldn't happen to me.
But look at all those donkeys back there, and look at all that. I mean, at some point you're like,
for sure.
okay, wait.
Yeah, exactly.
This would be an elaborate ruse.
And I think that's in 27. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent him carrying, the spirit of their father Jacob revived.
Yeah, because again, like we talked about, I think on last episode, this is like 25-ish years later.
Yeah.
Like this isn't, again, I always get struck by this because you turn a couple of pages in the Bible and decades have passed.
Yeah.
But for us, it's just a couple of pages, but we have to kind of zoom back out. How long are we talking here?
Yeah.
The length of a young man's life, literally.
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
Well, and I think the language in 28 is super important, in the shift from 27 to 28, where Jacob doesn't believe, and then verse 28, then Israel said. So he's Jacob, when he doesn't believe, right? And then he goes to, then Israel said, it is enough.
Yeah, well, it goes back up to verse 21, the sons of Israel. Like there's a couple of times that the author refers to him as Israel. So, I mean, there's different views on why that is. If a redactor did that or whatever. But anyway, it is something to notice and look into.
Yeah, because I wonder if that when it was sort of benign telling the narrative of Israel, it did that. And also when maybe he was faithful. And then when it was Jacob being human and being Jacob,
could be. Yeah, sure.
they made sure that the reader understood, Yeah, that's what was that was going to be my question. Was this a Moses thing or was this a translator thing?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. But I did look back at the times where, remember last episode when I told you guys that Jacob was really annoying me with this whole favoring the kids. So I went back to look at all the times when Jacob thought everything was about him.
Yeah.
Like 42:36 is kind of the poster child of that, where Jacob says, all these things are against me.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, please. And so all of those times it did call him Jacob.
Interesting. Yeah.
And here it spoke of him as Israel. But you're right, it does talk about the sons of Israel did so.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Verse 28, and Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. And I think, Laura, you said this earlier about Joseph, that it was a long time for Joseph of loneliness, being without his brothers, and then there was this weight that was lifted. And I think that as a dad. And, I don't have as many as children as he had. I've got 4, but I imagine the weight of thinking for so long I've had this big loss. And then when it came back, that there's this protective nature that happens, like you said earlier, Jeff, like, no, it can't be true. And then it is.
Yeah.
And so it's a long time coming where this weight was lifted. And I imagine for Israel, for Jacob, that it was really sweet.
And you know what else I noticed that reminded me of way back in verse 3, right after he admits who he is, he immediately says, I am Joseph, is my father still alive?
Yeah.
I mean, back to back.
Yeah.
And that's that same sort of thing that you were talking about, just that loss and that immediacy of, this is who I am, please tell me.
Right.
Yeah.
Is he still alive? It's that humanness.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. Well, that's 45. Is there, what are some things? I mean, we've talked a lot about application kind of throughout today, but are there some things that you look back over your notes from your study that we didn't hit along the way that you guys want to kind of highlight, even if it's just to geek out and say you saw it and you found it?
We hit on it, but I'd love to kind of peel it back a little bit. Just this whole concept of, was this stuff a product of the brother's sin or God's faithfulness? And if it is the brother's sin, how can it also be God's faithfulness? I think people struggle with that and how to answer that question. And we've already talked a little bit about the tension of it. And that is the answer, is that there's going to be tension. But let's kick that around for a minute.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
I'll let you think a little more, and I'll think as I talk.
Yeah, there you go.
Listen to me verbally process. See, Joey, what it feels like for someone else to be the question asker?
Yeah,
That's right.
No, I just think that, that's where I tell people all the time to keep learning and keep digging, because we're not the first person to ever ask this question. And just like Joseph was ready because of this long-timed faithfulness, that he had time with the Lord, that he was receiving from the Lord, I think for all of us, there are things we need to know in order for the times when we're having to endure and persevere, and that's in our toolbox to bring back out. So I think that's my encouragement to people. I don't have the clean-cut answer of like what's happening here. It's more of like the pastoral encouragement in the moment of like, hey, be faithful to read the scriptures. Be faithful to be in community. Be faithful to do some of those disciplines so that you are well-equipped for when you are facing these troubles and facing these times, that you really can believe in the sovereignty of God, that you can see, not to use a secular term, but a silver lining in the Lord at work in this. Because if we believe some basic things about, for example, it's not just the sovereignty of God, but if you believe that we're in process of sanctification, that we are being formed to be more like Jesus, that there are going to be things in this life that allow us to get there, and so if we can know about sanctification, we can know about growth, we can know about what our purpose here on earth, the glory of God. That we can know these theological truths. It gives us something to grab onto, like a life raft, or to hold on to in the midst of being in the storm.
I think that's good. I mean, just to add to that, I think a lot of times I think a story does a good job of pointing out something, is we always think the story is about us.
Yeah.
And what you see in Joseph's acknowledgement of that, right there in the middle of verse 7 or 8, is that he realizes that the story is about more than him.
Yeah.
And so, yes, God was sanctifying him through his circumstances, but God was also sanctifying the rest of his family through his circumstances. And as all that was happening, God was working out a plan to not only save the nation of Egypt, but the coming nation that he had promised. It's like all those things are happening. So somehow Joseph was able to say, yes, this has affected me, but I know this is about more than just me.
Right.
It made me think of Acts 2 and Peter's sermon. Pick up in verse 22. Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. This Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed
That's good.
By the hands of lawless men. So it's like even God's own son, according to the plan and foreknowledge of God the Father, was delivered up, right, before the purpose that God superintended over everything. So I think, and again, it's like, we see Jesus say, be great if this cup could pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. And so I think in Joseph, we see just a picture of that as well. It's like, my will would have been to turn 18 at home, and not as a slave in Egypt necessarily, but God had other plans. And now with perspective, I understand what that was.
That's good.
No, it is really good, because I think particularly it's about me, and we become so me-centric. It really is, a miserable place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus the perspective being on God. Just the weight you have to carry just with it all being about you.
Yeah.
And that sounds so harsh.
Yeah.
If someone's listening to this and they're feeling the weight of the stuff they're going through,
Yeah.
it's really hard. And that's why just being prepared beforehand, and then my encouragement,
Yeah.
if you're in the midst of it and you feel not prepared, that's where community wraps around you and helps speak grace and truth into your life, I don't know.
I think that the sovereignty of God, we're either going to choose to see it as something that gives us peace or something that we're going to fight and wrestle with. Because to me, one of the things that this story shows is that God is reigning. God is in control. It's not good men who are in control. It's not evil men who are in control. It's not the circumstance that's in control. It's not fate. I mean, in our heads, sometimes we think, well, God's in control if good people are. No, it's actually not people at all who are in control.
Yep.
Pharaoh was supposedly the bad guy in the story. He does the most good things in this particular part. The brothers are the part of the chosen family. They do the bad stuff. I mean, it's just God's in control.
Yeah. Yeah.
He uses people how he wishes.
And yet we see humanness in this story with Joseph and Jacob.
There's nothing random in this story.
And so with the humanness aspect of it, like it's also okay to grieve.
Yeah.
It's also okay to feel loss, in the
Joseph
midst
did. He
of it.
cries 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think the whole episode has really every moment we've picked out of here has been attention. Like, for example, when you said earlier that Joseph remembered he sold him, but yet God, he said he attributed it to God. So I just think, like, again, I know you guys are like, man, you guys always talk about the tension, Just give me an answer. Give me the black and white. Give me the manual. Well, that's it. It's the answer is that it's a both and. There is a humanness component to this, and yet God sits on the throne, as Lori said earlier.
Yeah, that's good.
Cool. Austin, that was great. Good conversation. Got off the rails with Jess Watch a couple times.
I still don't know what's
And
going
you
on
being a
there.
criminal.
And me, that's right.
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah.
was so random. When
You
you're
know
trying to
how
cover
when
a
you-
crime.
No, you know when you just committed a crime? No?
Oh, please come back next week. Please come back. Thanks, guys.